Shalom friends, welcome to the Shiur in Tanya, Sefer Shel Beinonim, the book for the average men, also known as the Likutei Amarim, because it is a collection of sayings that the Alter Rebbe wrote down, Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, 18th century. And we're learning how to work on ourselves and understand the mysteries of the soul. I'm Eliyahu Sher from Chesed Ve'emet. My site can be found on www.lovingkindness.co. Today's shiur has been dedicated in the merit and for Refuah Shlema for Carmel Bas Sarah. May the words of Torah be for healing. The words that we hear help us to heal, and may Hashem reward us in this merit by healing us all, that we should be healthy to be able to hear these beautiful words and to grow and to continue to live and v'chai by him, live in the words of Torah to serve Hashem. And in no way should we have to leave the world that unfortunately would not be able to serve Hashem. Torah is about life. May these words bring life and refuah to Carmel Bas Sarah. So we're on chapter 24 of the Tanya, and we're in a section of Tanya from chapters 18 to 25, dealing with the concept of the hidden love that a Jew has, that he can bring up any time to serve Hashem. And the hidden love is what attracts him to connect with the mitzvot, because he desires nothing more than to cleave to Hashem. And the hidden love brings up also the feelings of fear of Hashem, to awaken him to realize he needs to be careful to not stumble in the aveiros. And we learned that a Jew has this potential in him that when it comes to certain aveiros, for example, the well-known one of adultery, that a Jew is able to say to himself, I will not separate from God for a second. And when he's put with that test of idolatry, he can hold himself back from committing the aveira. And in fact, he can go to the stage of martyrdom. He can give over his life, al kiddush Hashem, rather than serve an idol, even to bow down to the idol for just a second. And the question that we're asking ourselves in these chapters that we're clarifying, and by the time we get to the end of chapter 25, we see how it gets put together. The question we ask ourselves is, why can't we use the same idea to prevent us from committing any aveira? It shouldn't just be for the aveira of idolatry that we're willing to give up our lives. We should really be willing to give up our lives for any aveira, because after all, as the Tanya is going to explain to us, that any aveira is less punishment, it's less hard for us than the punishment of death. And therefore, we should be able to prevent ourselves from stumbling on any aveira. Now, in last week's shiur, we learned that the amazing thing is that even the lowest Kelipah is higher than a person who commits an aveira. And that is because the Kelipah knows who God is. And when the Kelipah, when the evil force is involved in an action of negativity in this world, it does something that is evil, it produces something that is evil, it really does it to fulfill God's will, and it knows that God is there. The only thing is that it takes charge, and it says, I am in charge of this. And so to speak, the godly spark is in exile within the Kelipah. However, for a Jew, for a human being, he has the ability to say, no, I will not do this action because I recognize God. He is on a level whereby he can choose to prevent himself from going ahead with the aveira, whereas the Kelipah is serving God by doing the evil. So when a person goes against God, he goes even lower than the Kelipah. This is the point that we got to. V'lachein, and therefore, einam ovrim retzono yisbarach le'olam. This is why we say that the Kelipah does not go against the will of Hashem ever. V'im kain, says the Alter Rebbe, if that's the case, ha'adam ha'over al retzono yisbarach, a person who transgresses the will of God, who garua upachot harbe me'od me'asitra acha. The person who transgresses against the will of God is lower, and much lower than the other side, the evil side of creation, or Kelipah, and the husks. Hanikreis avodah zara ve'elokim acherim, which is called idolatry and other gods. והוא בתכלס הפירוד מייחודו ואחדוסו של הקדוש ברוך הוא יותר ממנה. And the person who commits the aveira, no matter what aveira it is that he commits, he is at the absolute nth degree, end point of separation from the unity and the oneness of the Holy One, blessed is He, even more so than it. When a person commits an aveira, no matter what aveira it is, he separates himself from God even for a moment, like the person who would have committed idolatry. And this person who commits the aveira, it is as if he denies the unity even more so than the Kelipah. Because the Kelipah knows what it's doing, and the Kelipah knows that God is there. But when we commit an aveira ourselves, it is almost our way of ignoring that the godly presence is where we are. When we do that action against God, it is our way of saying, I don't really believe that God is here, that He is watching me, or that He is aware of anything that I'm doing, or that what I'm doing really goes against His wishes. And in this way, we push God away from us and say, as if to say, that God is not even present. The Kelipah acknowledges God. We do not acknowledge God at that point in time when we commit the aveira. As it's written there in the Eitz Chaim, that the evil that is in this world, hachomri, this material world, it is the dross of the thick husks. The evil in this world is the dross, which means to say, when we sort out the good of this world and we're left with the bad that remains behind it, that is the evil that sits behind after the good is removed. And this is the perfection of the sorting out. Therefore, all actions of this world, all things that go on in this world, are bad and are hard and are difficult. And the evil overrule it. The evil are ruling over all matters of this world, because the majority of the world is made up of the dross that sits in the world denying God's existence. And therefore, our rabbis have said, al pasuk, on the verse that says in Bamidbar, Perek Hey, pasuk Yud Beis, ki tiste ishto, that when his wife will go astray, ein adam over aveira, says the Gemara, a person does not commit an aveira, ela im kein nichneset bo ruach shtus, unless there enters into him a spirit of folly. Let's look at those words again. There's a play on words here. The wording in the Chumash says when one's wife or woman will turn astray, and what will she do? She will engage in an adulterous relationship. Why did she engage in the adulterous relationship? Because of the tisteh, which is related to the word shoteh, shtut, which means foolishness. What happens to the woman who engages into this adulterous relationship is that there enters into her literally a negative spirit of foolishness that persuades her that what she's about to do is okay. In fact, any time that we engage in any aveira, it is because of this ruach shtus, meaning to say, we are on a path, we're serving God, all is well, I'm putting on the tefillin, I'm davening, I'm eating kosher, and then one day something happens and it makes me fall to tremendously low levels. One says, how did that happen? I was so close to Hashem. The reason it happened is because there's a ruach shtus, there's a spirit of folly that enters into a person, misdirects him, and makes him think that the path that he is now on is in fact acceptable. The afilu isha hamena'efes, that even a woman who is an adulterous woman, sheda'ata kala, and her mind already is on a light level. She's not thinking straight. She's already thinking of all sorts of activities in life, distracted. Hayata moshelet beruach ta'avata. And the truth is, if she wanted to, she could rule over the spirit of her desires. Lulei ruach shtus sheba, were it not for the spirit of folly that enters into her, hamechaseu mastir, that covers over and hides, uma'alim, and hides, et ha'ahava, the love, mesuteret shebenafsha, which is concealed within her soul, ha'elokit, in the godly soul, ledavka be'emunas Hashem, to cleave to the faith of Hashem, ve'yichudo, and to his unity, ve'achduso, and his oneness, ve'lo liparet chas v'shalom, and not to be separated from her, God forbid, me'achduso, from his oneness, from God's oneness, afilu not limit nafsha mimena, even if God were to take her soul away from her, la'avod avodah zarah chas v'shalom, if it had to be that she had to serve idolatry. What does that mean? It means that if this woman was approached to serve idols, she would find it easy to stop herself and say, I would rather die al kiddush Hashem than to serve idols. So what changed her mind here when it came to committing the adultery? What changed her mind is a ruach shtus, a spirit of folly entered into her, making her think that what she was doing was totally acceptable. It made her think differently. Suddenly what she thinks she's doing is as if, oh, God doesn't really see this. God's not really aware of this. It's okay if I do this. It's not so bad. But how come was it when she was involved in the aveira of avodah zorah, she was willing to give over her life? But when it came to the aveira of adultery, at that point in time, something changed in her. The Gemara says the ruach shtus entered into her, and as a result of that, distracted her and took her away from imagining that at this point in time, she was losing her connection with God. She still imagines that when she commits this aveira, she is still connecting with God. Whereas with idolatry, she imagines and knows that were she to commit that aveira, she would for sure be separating herself from God. Even to just bow down to the idol, without any faith in her heart at all. She wouldn't even do that because she knows how wrong it is. The kol shekain, and all the more so, lichvosh hayetzer, in order to overrule the inclination, the ta'avas hani'uf, and the desire of sexual immorality, adultery, shehein yisurim kalim mimita, that if a person holds himself back from these things, it is a lot more lenient, it's a lot lighter than the punishment of death. It is a lot easier to deal with not engaging in the adulterous relationship than it is to have to die for the sake of worshipping an idol. So therefore, what persuaded her that she could do it? She could commit this aveira? Only the spirit of folly. Hashem yishmarenu, Hashem should protect us from all of these things that we're speaking about. And the difference to her, between the prohibition of adultery, to the prohibition of bowing down, to idolatry, the Kelipah, it is because of the spirit of folly, of these husks, which clothes over the godly soul, up until the aspect of wisdom in it. Not included, because Chokhmah is above. Bina, Chokhmah is above all of this, whereby when we come to the Aveira of Avodah Zorah, Chokhmah kicks in, and without even a person thinking, he says to himself, I will not bow down to the idol, even if it means a cost and a risk to me losing my life. That is the aspect of Chokhmah that is overwhelming. But when it came to the other Aveiras, like the Aveira of adultery, at this point in time, the level of the Kelipah was covering up until the Chokhmah, persuading her that it is okay to commit the Aveira of adultery. And this is because of the light of Hashem, which enclosed itself within Chokhmah, canal, and prevents the person from involving themselves in the Aveira of idolatry. Aval, but in absolute truth, afilu Aveira kala, even the most lightest Aveira, the lightest sin possible, hare ha'ovra over al ratzon ha'elyon, a person who commits a sin, even the lightest one, He transgresses against the supernal will, Baruch Hu, blessed is he. V'hu betaklis hapirud miyichudo v'achduso yisbarach yeter me'sitra achra. He is at a complete separation from the unity and the oneness of God, even more than the sitra achra or Kelipah and the husk, hanikraos Elohim acherim, which are called other gods, v'avodah zorah, and idolatry, mamash. V'yeter mikol hadvarim, and more than all these things, hanishba'im mimena, which are coming from it, ba'olam hazeh, in this world, sheheim behemoths, like for example, behemoths tameos, impure animals, v'chayas, and wild animals, v'oifos, and birds, tameim, impure birds, ushkatzim uramasim, all sorts of creepy, crawly creatures. In other words, when a person commits an aveira, he brings himself to a level that is below the level of the Kelipot. He even brings himself to a level that is below the Kelipah as it exists in an animal, a wild animal, as it exists in birds, impure, creepy, crawly creatures. A man who sins brings himself to a level lower than that, and he causes himself to be separated from God, even more so than all these creepy, crawly creatures who are in fact connected to God on a higher level than we are at the time that we commit Aveira. Ukamamar, and as the expression goes, Yitosh kadmach, the mosquito preceded you. Of course, in the order of creation, all the animals preceded the creation of man, which means we need to be aware that before we were created, even the mosquito preceded us. But there's another way of understanding this word. When we say that the mosquito preceded us, it means to say, don't forget that at times a mosquito can be greater than we are. Pirush, which means the af yitosh, even a mosquito. Shemaknis ve'eno motzi, that it brings food into itself and it does not expel anything. It is the height of the Kelipah because it gives nothing of itself to anything else. The height of Kelipah is when a person takes for himself and he gives nothing to anybody else. This is the nature of the fly and the nature of these particular creatures that we're speaking about. And yet, we must remember that when we commit an aveira, that this gnat, this mosquito, this fly, is actually on a higher level than we are, even in spite of the fact that it gives nothing of itself. Shehi Kelipah hayeter taktoina urechoika mibechinas hakedusha, because this is the husk that is the lowest and the furthest away from the aspect of holiness. Hamashpa'as betachlis harichok kodemes, that it is most distant from holiness that comes in a total distance that preceded. Le'isha choite, to the person who sins. The ishtalshelus, through the chain-like descent of tzimtzumim, of contractions that come down into this world. V'yeridas hachayos me'ratzon ha'elyon baruch hu, and the descent of life force that comes down from the will of Hashem. V'kol she'kein she'ar ba'alei chayim atmeim, and all the more so, all of the other impure animals, va'afilu chayos ra'ot, even the wild animals, ferocious animals, shekulam einam mishanim tafkidam, that you know what? None of these animals change their duties. Every animal does what it's supposed to do. So you say a lion attacks another animal and kills it with its teeth, rips it apart and eats it. You say, isn't that lowly? What human being would behave in such a way? I'm cultured. I'm far greater than the lion. But that is not true, because the lion is completely attached to God, and the lion is aware of its duty in the world, and it knows that in order to survive and to fulfill its duty in the world, this is what it needs to do to serve God. The lion serves God in this particular way. If it didn't, there would be no more lions in the world. This part of nature would be taken away from us, because it is the nature of the lion to destroy other animals in order to survive. And God indeed guards their spirits. V'afal gav de'ihu lo chazi, and even though the lion or these creatures do not see their attachment to God, they do not experience it, for example, on the level of Ruach HaKodesh, that they know and experience the godly force that's inside them. Perhaps they don't. But as the teaching goes, even though they don't see it, mazlei chazeh, their innerness, their intrinsic inner point of the nature of their soul knows that they are connected to God. They do not separate from God for even a second. They serve God in what they do. But that's not what we're doing. And that's what the Alter Rebbe is telling us. That when we come to commit an Aveira, we separate ourselves from God. We say there is no God at this point in time. That is why I'm committing this Aveira. And the Alter Rebbe is here to teach us. The whole point of these chapters between 18 and 25 is to come and tell us our duty is to awaken this hidden love, to know that it exists within us, so that we will constantly cleave to Hashem, desiring nothing more than to cleave to the mitzvot, to study Torah, to involve ourselves in prayer, and to keep ourselves away from any possibility of committing any Aveira that could cause, therefore, an immediate separation between us and Hashem. Yes, indeed, the smallest Aveira that we commit makes a separation between us and Hashem. We may not feel it, but it is happening. And that is the danger in itself. U'kamo shene'emar in Bereshis Perek Tet, pasuk base, as it says in Bereshis over there, U'morachem v'tchitchem yeh al kol chayes haaretz. God gave a reward and a blessing to the first man in the world. He said to him, your fear and your, another word for fear, will be upon all the creatures of the ground. Hashem was giving a blessing to Adam, and he was saying to him that as a human being, when you find yourself in the presence of animals, all animals will fear you and respect you. They will not come to tear you apart. They will come to respect you. They will come to sit next to you. They will not destroy you. That is the blessing that I'm giving you. Why? Because you are far greater than they are. Meaning, in potential, of course. In potential, your essence is so much holier, so much greater than what these creatures are, that when they see you, they will respect you and they will bring no harm to you whatsoever. Ukapirush Razal, and as our rabbis have explained, she'ein chaya ra'a moshelet ba'adam, that no evil animal rules over no ferocious animal will rule over a person, ela in kain nidmela kibehema, unless a person appears like an animal to that animal. The only time that an animal will attack a human being is when the human being has lost his divine image and the animal no longer sees the divine image upon him and thinks that that person is just another animal who is about to attack it, and it needs to fight for its right to survival. But the righteous people, that the image of God never leaves from upon their faces. All of the ferocious animals subjugate themselves to these people. As it's written in the Zohar, Gabe Daniel Begova Ariot, as it's written about the story of Daniel when he found himself in the lion's den. As everybody knows the famous story that Daniel was praying 3 times a day and he'd been caught out. And as a result, he was going to be sentenced to death. And the king had to place him in the lion's den with some lions that hadn't even eaten. And he was there overnight. And while he was in the den, he spent the entire night there, and the lions brought him no harm whatsoever, and he was saved from the lions. And when he came out of that, everybody was amazed. And so the people that, of course, had instructed that he be put into the lion's den were then ultimately themselves killed as a result of what had happened. Everybody could see that Daniel was in the right. Now, why was it that the lions didn't eat him up? Because they saw on him the image of God. And as a result of seeing the image of God, they would bring no harm to Daniel. When a person has the image of God upon oneself, no animal will attack one because he's completely united with God. If so, a person who sins and he transgresses against the will of Hashem, even if it is a light sin, at the time of his action, he is at that point in time at the very nth degree of distance from the supernal holiness. This is the unity and the oneness of God. At the moment that the person commits an avera, he separates himself immediately from God, even more so than all of the impure animals, ushkatzim urumasim, and all the creepy crawly creatures, hamushba'im misitra akra, who are receiving, who basically are being influenced from the sitra akra, v'klipos avodah zorah, and through the husk of the idolatry of the avodah zorah, the strange service. So at this point in time, we see that the Alter Rebbe is telling us that when we commit an avera, we bring ourselves to a level that is lower than the animals because we separate ourselves from God at the moment that we engage in the avera. But the animals of the world never separate themselves from God. They simply fulfill God's will, whatever it is. And even if they don't actively know what they're doing, but internally, their innermost point knows that they are indeed serving God through whatever action they're involved in. Now the Alter Rebbe continues with the discussion, and he says, very interesting idea. If that's the case, and we speak about the idea of avodah zorah being so severe, and nevertheless all averas separate oneself from God, we have a difficulty. We know that when it comes to pikuach nefesh, when it comes to saving the life of another person, it puts aside all other averas, which means when a person is in trouble, for example, let's say, as we're going to see in a minute, that when a person's life is in danger and he could die, God forbid, if he doesn't do a particular avera, but if he does the avera, he'll be able to live. So as long as it's not the averas of idolatry and murder and incest, so he may do it. V'gam ya'avor v'al yeherag, and therefore he should transgress it rather than be killed. Hayinu, this means to say, Kepirush Chazal, as our rabbis have expounded, Amra Torah, the Torah said, Chalel alav Shabbos achat, transgress one Shabbos, Kedei sheyishmor Shabbatot harbei, in order that you will be able to observe many Shabboses. What is the reason that a Jew is entitled to break Shabbos? For the sake of pikuach nefesh, he can break Shabbos, which is an avera. And we're learning over here that when we commit an avera, we separate ourselves from God. Therefore, we shouldn't do it. Yet over here, when it comes to Shabbos, we are entitled to break Shabbos. Why? Because when we break one Shabbos, we will be able to fulfill many other Shabboses afterwards. The reason that we're engaged in the avera of breaking Shabbos is not in order to distance ourselves and separate from God, but rather in order that we will be able to connect to God on a higher level, because the next Shabbos we'll be able to fulfill. And the next Shabbos afterwards, we'll be able to keep that too. V'lo mishum kalus averis. The reason that this is given over this way is not because the avera is so light, v'chumran, or it's so strict. How do we know that? Teda, you should know. Sheharei Shabbos chamura ushkula ka'avodah zorah. Shabbos is as strict and is weighed up as much as idolatry le'inyan shchitas muma ledvar echad. When it comes to the mitzvah of shchita, well, if a person breaks Shabbos, he may not function as a shochet because he is considered to be on the same degree as an idolater. As it says, B'Shulchan Aruch Yeredeya Beis Mem Hey, it says over there in Halacha, she'ein kein b'mumar legiloy arayot, which is not the case of a person who engages himself in the avera of incest. There it doesn't say that he cannot function as a sheichet, but if he breaks Shabbos, he may not. So we see over here that the avera of Shabbos is very, very serious. And therefore, when we speak about this idea of pikuach nefesh and separating ourselves from God, let us not make a mistake and make up statements as to if you want to, you can break certain mitzvahs and it's not a problem. Va'afilu hachi, even so, pikuach nefesh deiche Shabbos v'lo gilu arot. We should know that pikuach nefesh pushes aside, saving a person on Shabbos, pushes aside all the mitzvahs of Shabbos, whereas the avera of incest does not push aside for the sake of pikuach nefesh. One may break Shabbos in order to observe further Shabboses, but one may not break the rules of incest and say as an excuse that I'll be able to live longer as a result. When I commit this act of incest, it will give me the strength that on further occasions I won't do it. I just need to do it on this one occasion. Ella, but rather, the gezeres hakosuvhu, the only reason that the Torah brings out these particular averas of avodah zorah, of gilui arayos, of shvikas damim, and it speaks about it and says that a person should rather give up his life than commit them, it is only because the Torah said these three mitzvahs or averas are the very mitzvahs or averas we need to refrain from under the penalty of death, which means to say a person is more willing to give up his life for these averas rather than commit these averas. Now the Alter Rebbe continues, which I'd like to just do a little bit more so that we can hear the thought in its fullness. The difference between the idea of idolatry and any other avera that a person commits, which still separates him from God, and which he must still be careful not to do because it separates him from God as much as the sin of idolatry. Nevertheless, after he does the particular sin, if included in these averas that a person does, there is not included within it the penalty of excision or death through the hands of heaven, that his godly soul will not die completely, and be cut off from its roots, belokim chayim, in the living God, only that what will happen is he will blemish a little bit the cleaving and the holding to his root through the sin, which means to say, when a person commits the sin of idolatry, for example, the Torah gives an explanation, a comparison, and says that in this particular example, we can imagine that the Torah, which consists of 613 mitzvahs, can be compared to a rope made out of 613 strands. When a person commits the avera of idolatry, or these other averas that we're speaking about, it is as if he takes the scissors and he cuts all 613 strands in 1 second, and he destroys himself and cuts himself off completely from Hashem. However, when it is that he commits an avera, which doesn't fit into this category, rather what happens to him is it's as if he cuts one of the strings. And therefore the rope still holds strong. If he does another avera, another string is cut, and so on and so forth. But he's still able to hold onto it. But when he does one of these big averas, it is like he cuts through the entire rope in 1 second. Says the note, according to the division of the aspects of the defect in his soul and the supernal roots, so too is the division of the aspect of the cleaning process and the punishment that a person gets in the next world in Gehenna, or that he gets in this world. For whatever we're talking about in the particular sin or punishment that's specific for it, in order to clean and to remove the dirt from the blemish. So too with regards to averas that entail the obligation, the liability of death and kares and excision, Ein pogmim kulam b'shaveh. They aren't affected, all of them, in an equal manner, and therefore a person is punished in equivalent to the particular avera that he did. So he concludes and he says, Haregam nafsho hachionit habahamis hamulebeshet begufo. So too, his life soul, his animalistic soul, which is enclosed within the body, v'chein begufo, and also his body, choizrim v'olim mehasitra akra. They return and they ascend from the sitra akra, uklipah, and the husk, zor, this husk, umitkarvim lekedushas nefesh ha'elokit, and they come close again to the holiness of the godly soul, hamelubeshet bahem, which is enclosed in, hama'amina b'Hashem echad, which believes in the one God. This brings us to this last point over here, just to clarify what's happened. When a person commits an aveira, like something deserving of kares, idolatry, etc., it is like taking the rope and cutting through in one shot. The person is wiped out, is completely separated from God. To get back to being cleaving to God is almost an impossible task, although the Alter Rebbe is going to tell us that there is a way to do it. But when we commit an ordinary aveira, inverted commas, an ordinary aveira, and we say he has distanced himself from God, he has separated himself from God, but at the time that he does it, he separates. When he completes the aveira, he immediately returns back to his level where he can return and cleave to God once again. The aveira that he does breaks him off for just a moment, and then he is able to return back to godliness, as the Alter Rebbe is describing to us, as he's going to describe in further detail. But when he does an aveira like idolatry, he cuts himself off completely. Nevertheless, committing that simple aveira is no different in concept from being cut off from God. The cutting off is equivalent. The only difference being that after he commits an ordinary aveira, not in the category of kares, mita b'dei shamayim, and idolatry, etc., so at that point in time, there is a healing process where he can return back to his original state very quickly and connect back to God. This is what the Alter Rebbe is describing. We have to cleave, we have to waken up this hidden love so that we can learn to cleave to Hashem and refrain from committing aveiras. And this is the path that we need to take in order to get there. Thanks very much for joining me. I'm Eliyahu Shir from Chesed Ve'emet. You can find my site on www.lovingkindness.co. Please like this shiur, I'd really appreciate it, and offer your comments if you're able to. Feel free to be in touch with me on my website, or see what we're up to and find out more about what we're doing. If you'd like to join me for another shiur or a shiur of your choice in private, please contact me and I'd be delighted to be in touch with you. Thanks so much for joining me. I look forward to another shiur with you very soon, and I wish you everything of the best. Shalom, shalom. Bye-bye.